A man who never showed fear finally broke the night another man made her laugh. 14 months of silence shattered when Damian Calloway, Chicago's most feared crime lord, watched his bodyguard smile at someone else. What began as professional distance became obsession. What felt like control was actually terror. And when bullets tore through downtown streets during a rainstorm ambush, the only name on his lips wasn't business. It was hers. This is the story of a woman trained to protect and a man who forgot how to feel anything until jealousy reminded him what he stood to lose. Rain hammered the glass walls of Damian Calloway's penthouse like bullets nobody had fired yet. 40 floors above Chicago, powerful men in tailored suits whispered over crystal tumblers filled with whiskey worth more than most people earned in a year. Cigar smoke curled toward recessed lighting, while leather chairs creaked under the weight of egos nobody dared challenge directly. Claire Whitmore stood near the entrance, wearing black tactical clothing that fit her frame like a second skin. Former military intelligence. 3 tours overseas before private sector money pulled her into something darker and infinitely more complicated. Sharp green eyes swept the room in mechanical intervals. Exits mapped, threat assessment running, breathing controlled. 14 months. That's how long she had protected Damian Calloway without ever once believing he saw her as anything beyond a useful weapon. Damian sat at the head of a marble table that cost more than a luxury sedan. His posture relaxed in a way that somehow communicated absolute authority. Black dress shirt rolled to his forearms, tattoos climbing above his collar in patterns Claire had memorized without meaning to. Dark hair swept back, jaw tight, eyes cold and calculating behind gold-rimmed glasses he only wore during business meetings. He never raised his voice, never repeated himself, trusted almost nobody, and he had never, not once in 14 months, looked at Claire Whitmore like she was a woman instead of a soldier. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself professionalism meant emotional distance. She told herself a lot of lies that worked until they didn't. Across the room, Viktor Sokolov leaned back in his chair and gestured broadly with hands scarred from decades of violence nobody discussed in polite company. Russian accent thick as the smoke filling the space. You ask for patience, Damian, but patience requires trust, and trust requires proof. Damian sipped his whiskey without breaking eye contact. You'll have your proof when the shipment clears customs, not before. Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. Perhaps you forget who you're negotiating with. I forget nothing. Damian's voice dropped lower, colder, the kind of quiet that made grown men reconsider their life choices. Which is why I remember the last man who questioned my word ended up regretting his doubt. The room went silent except for rain against glass and the faint hum of city noise 40 floors below. Claire shifted her weight imperceptibly. Her hands stayed loose near her concealed sidearm. Not threatening, just ready. Always ready. Victor stared at Damian for 5 long seconds before finally nodding once. Then we wait. The tension broke like a rubber band snapping. Conversations resumed. Deals continued. Money changed hands through coded language and handshakes worth millions. Claire exhaled slowly and let her hand fall away from her weapon. Another night, another negotiation, another room full of dangerous men who believed power meant never showing vulnerability. She had stopped counting how many times she watched Damian navigate these moments with perfect control. How he never flinched, never hesitated, never let anyone see past the armor he wore like a second skeleton. The meeting ended an hour later. Men filed out through the private elevator while bodyguards flanked them like silent shadows. Claire stayed near the door, scanning faces, memorizing details nobody else would notice or care about. When the last guest disappeared into the elevator, Damian stood and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago's skyline. Rain streaked down the glass in patterns that looked almost artistic under city lights. Problems? Claire asked. Not yet, Damien didn't turn around. But Victor's getting impatient. Victor's always impatient, which means he's getting dangerous. Claire moved closer but kept professional distance between them. Always professional distance. You want extra security on the next shipment? I want to know who's feeding him information about our timeline. Damien finally turned to face her. His eyes looked darker in the low light, tired in a way he never showed anyone else. Someone's talking. I need to know who. I'll run background checks on everyone with access. Do it quietly. I always do. Something flickered across Damien's expression. Acknowledgement, maybe respect, before his usual mask slipped back into place. Get some sleep, Claire. Tomorrow's going to be long. She nodded once and headed toward the elevator. 14 months of this. 14 months of watching him carry an empire on his shoulders without ever asking for help. 14 months of memorizing his habits, his tells, the way his voice changed when pressure built too high. 14 months of wanting something she told herself was impossible. The elevator doors closed and Claire leaned against the metal wall, while Chicago disappeared above her in smooth, mechanical descent. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. Professional distance. That's what kept people alive in this world. That's what she repeated to herself every single night before falling asleep alone. 2 weeks later, everything changed because of a laugh. Ethan Mercer was young, ambitious, and dangerously charismatic in ways that made older men nervous and younger women interested. Recently promoted into Damien's inner circle after proving himself during a supply chain crisis that could have cost millions. Brown hair styled just carefully enough to look effortless. Easy smile. Confident posture that suggested he had never once doubted himself. Claire didn't trust him yet, but she also couldn't ignore how easily he made her feel normal. They were reviewing security footage in Damien's downtown office. A legitimate business front that looked like any other corporate headquarters from the outside. Inside, however, power ran deeper than quarterly earnings reports. Ethan leaned over Claire's shoulder, squinting at the monitor showing warehouse camera feeds. Wait, go back. She rewound 15 seconds. There, Ethan pointed at the screen. That guy's been circling the same section for 20 minutes. Claire studied the figure carefully. Could be lost. Or could be scouting the place for later. Ethan grinned. You always this cautious? You say cautious. I say thorough. Claire couldn't help it. She laughed. Not loud, not dramatic, just a genuine sound that escaped before she could stop it. And across the room, Damien's head turned sharply toward the noise. He had been reviewing financial documents at his desk. Silent, focused, completely absorbed in whatever numbers filled the pages in front of him. Until Claire laughed. The sound froze him mid-motion. His pen stopped moving. His eyes lifted from the papers and locked onto the scene playing out 15 feet away. Ethan standing too close to Claire. Claire smiling at something Ethan said. The two of them existing in a moment that excluded everyone else. Something dark and sharp flickered behind Damien's carefully controlled expression. Jealousy. Raw and undeniable and completely out of character for a man who prided himself on never reacting emotionally to anything. Claire felt it before she saw it. The temperature in the room shifted. The air felt heavier. She glanced up and met Damien's stare across the distance separating them. His face revealed nothing, but his eyes told a completely different story. Ethan noticed nothing. He was still talking about surveillance patterns and potential security vulnerabilities, while Claire's pulse accelerated without permission. 14 months. 14 months of silence and professional distance and carefully maintained boundaries. And one laugh shattered all of it. The waterfront gala happened 3 nights later. Charity event, black tie crowd, politicians mixing with businessmen, mixing with criminals. Nobody could prove we're criminals. Everyone smiling. Everyone pretending the money came from legitimate sources. Claire wore a floor-length black gown that allowed concealed carry without obvious traces. Hair pulled into a severe bun. Minimal makeup. She looked elegant and lethal in equal measure. Exactly how Damien preferred his security to appear at high-profile events. She shadowed him through conversations that meant nothing and deals that meant everything. Watched his back while he shook hands and made promises he might or might not keep. Then Marcus Webb made a mistake. Wealthy real estate developer. Old money. The kind of confidence that came from never once experiencing real consequences. He approached Claire while Damien spoke with a senator across the room. "You must be exhausted," Marcus said smoothly, following him around all night. Claire kept her expression neutral. "I'm fine." "You're more than fine." Marcus let his gaze travel down her body in a way that made her skin crawl. Damien's lucky to have someone so dedicated. "I'm just doing my job." "Of course." Marcus touched her arm. Light pressure, familiar, inappropriate. "But surely you take breaks. Maybe I could—" He didn't finish the sentence because Damien crossed 30 feet of crowded ballroom in approximately 4 seconds. No running, no shouting, just sudden presence like a storm materializing out of clear skies. His hand locked around Marcus's wrist with terrifying calm. The kind of grip that communicated exactly how easily bones could break if pressure increased even slightly. The surrounding conversations died instantly. Marcus's confident smile vanished. "Damien, I was just—" "You were just leaving." Damien's voice stayed quiet, almost courteous, which somehow made it infinitely more menacing. "Weren't you?" Marcus tried to pull his arm free. Damien didn't let go. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." Damien leaned closer. His voice dropped to a whisper only Marcus and Claire could hear. "Touch her again, and I'll make sure every real estate deal you have in this city vanishes overnight. We clear?" Marcus went pale. "Crystal." Damien released his wrist. Marcus stumbled backward, nearly knocking into a waiter carrying champagne flutes. He mumbled something that might have been an apology before disappearing into the crowd like a man suddenly remembering urgent business elsewhere. The party resumed slowly. Conversations picked back up. Laughter returned. But everyone present had just witnessed something nobody would forget. Damien Calloway didn't make scenes, which meant Claire Whitmore mattered in ways that went far beyond professional protection. Damien turned toward her. His jaw was tight. His hands were steady now, but she had felt them trembling when he grabbed Marcus. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "I can handle myself." "I know you can." His eyes searched her face like he was memorizing something he might lose. "Doesn't mean I want to watch other men touch you." The confession hung between them like smoke. Raw, honest, completely unguarded. Before Claire could respond, Damien's right-hand man, Lucas Reed, appeared beside them with urgent news whispered low enough that nearby guests wouldn't catch the details. "Business crisis. Immediate attention required." Damien's mask slipped back into place instantly. "We'll finish this later," he told Claire. Then he was gone, disappearing into a private room with Lucas, while Claire stood alone in the middle of a glittering ballroom full of people who didn't matter. Her heart was racing, her hands felt cold. And for the first time in 14 months, she wondered if Damien's silence had never been indifference. Maybe it had been fear all along. The weeks that followed felt like watching a dam develop cracks. Damien started asking questions he had never asked before. Where had she been during her off hours? Who had she spoken with? Did Ethan Mercer require additional assignments, or should he remain on his current detail? Claire answered honestly because lying would insult them both. But she also started noticing things. How Damien positioned himself near her during meetings. How his attention tracked her movements even when he appeared focused elsewhere. How his voice changed just slightly whenever Ethan entered a room where Claire was already present. Jealousy didn't make Damien loud or irrational. It made him focused in ways that should have been alarming. One Thursday afternoon, Claire found herself alone with Ethan in the downtown office again. Same surveillance footage review, same professional proximity. Except this time, Ethan leaned against the desk and said something that altered everything. "He watches you constantly. You know that, right?" Claire kept her eyes on the monitor. "He watches everyone. Not like he watches you." Ethan's voice stayed casual, but his words carried weight. I've worked for a lot of powerful men. None of them look at their security the way Damien looks at you. You're imagining things. Am I? Ethan crossed his arms. Because from where I'm standing, Damien Calloway, the coldest man in Chicago, looks like he's about 2 seconds away from losing his composure every time another man gets within 10 feet of you. Claire finally turned to face him. Why are you telling me this? Ethan shrugged. Because I like you, and I think you deserve to know the truth before you waste any more time pretending it's all professional. It is professional. Then why did he threaten to destroy Marcus Webb's entire career for touching your arm? Claire had no answer for that. Ethan pushed away from the desk. Look, I'm not trying to cause problems. I'm just saying maybe the distance isn't about him not caring. Maybe it's about him caring too much to risk ruining it. He left the office before Claire could respond. She sat alone with surveillance footage playing silently on the monitor, and Ethan's words echoing inside her head like truths she couldn't dismiss. Damien cared. Not professionally. Personally. The realization should have made things easier. Instead, it made everything infinitely more complicated. The summons came Friday night. Not through Lucas, not through official channels, just a text message from Damien's private number that Claire had only seen used during genuine emergencies. Come to the penthouse. Alone. No explanation. No context. Just the address she already knew and an instruction that felt more like a request. Claire changed out of her tactical gear into jeans and a black sweater. Nothing elaborate. Nothing that suggested she was trying to impress anyone. She told herself this was still business. She told herself boundaries still existed. She told herself a lot of things during the elevator ride 40 floors up to Damien's private residence. The doors opened directly into his penthouse. No hallway, no buffer, just immediate access to luxury designed for a man who valued privacy above everything else. Damien stood near the windows overlooking Chicago's glittering skyline. Same view she had seen dozens of times. Same rain streaking down glass in patterns that looked accidental, but probably weren't. He didn't turn around when she entered. You wanted to see me. Claire stayed near the elevator, giving herself an exit, professional instinct that felt increasingly hollow. I need to tell you something. Damien's voice sounded different, quieter, less controlled. And I need you to let me finish before you say anything. Claire's pulse quickened. Okay. 14 months ago, you walked into my office for a job interview. Military background, impressive references, a skill set I needed. He finally turned to face her. I hired you because you were the strongest candidate. That's what I told myself. And now? Now I think I hired you because the moment you walked through that door, something inside me recognized something inside you. Damien moved closer, but stopped several feet away, respecting distance even now. I told myself it was professional, that I needed someone competent, someone loyal, someone I could trust. You can trust me. I know. His jaw tightened. That's the problem, because somewhere between assignments and late nights and watching you handle situations that would break most people, I stopped seeing you as just security. Claire's breath caught. I spent 14 months keeping distance between us, Damien continued, convincing myself it was the right thing, that caring about you would put your safety at risk, that powerful men don't get to have normal relationships. They don't. No, they don't. He took another step closer. But then Ethan made you laugh, and I realized I had been deceiving myself about why I kept you at arm's length. Why did you? Because I was terrified. The confession came out raw, unfiltered, nothing like the controlled man who negotiated with killers without flinching. Terrified that if I let you close enough to matter, something would happen to you. Terrified that wanting you would put a target on your back. Terrified that the moment I admitted I needed you for more than protection, I'd lose you. Claire couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process the fact that Damien Calloway, Chicago's most feared crime lord, was standing in front of her, admitting fear.
And watching Marcus touch you at that gala. Damien's hands curled into fists. I wanted to destroy him. Not threaten, not intimidate. Destroy him. For daring to put his hands on someone who wasn't his. I'm not a possession. I know. He closed the remaining distance between them, close enough that Claire could see exhaustion in his eyes, vulnerability he never showed anyone. But you're also not just my bodyguard anymore. You haven't been for a long time, and I can't keep pretending distance protects either of us, when all it does is drive me toward madness every time another man looks at you the way I want to look at you. Rain hammered against the windows behind him. The city glowed 40 floors below, and Claire stood frozen between professional obligation and personal desire that had been building for 14 months without permission. If we cross this line, she said carefully, everything changes. I know. I can't protect you effectively if I'm emotionally compromised. Then stop protecting me. The suggestion hit like a physical blow. What? Quit the detail. Damien's voice stayed steady, but his eyes betrayed desperation underneath. Walk away from the job. Stay anyway. Claire stared at him. You're asking me to choose. I'm asking you to trust that I can keep myself alive long enough for you to figure out whether this, he gestured between them, is worth risking everything we've built. The silence stretched long enough that Claire could hear her own heartbeat pounding against her ribs. 14 months. 14 months of discipline and boundaries and professional distance that felt increasingly like a cage. She thought about Ethan's words, about the way Damien watched her, about Marcus's wrist trapped in an iron grip, about every small moment that suggested something existed beneath the surface they both pretended didn't matter. If I quit, Claire said slowly, and this doesn't work, it will. You don't know that. No. Damien reached up and brushed a strand of hair away from her face. His hand was trembling. But I know spending another 14 months pretending I don't care about you will destroy me faster than any enemy ever could. Claire closed her eyes and made a choice that frightened her more than any battlefield ever had. Okay. She opened her eyes and met his gaze directly. I'll submit my resignation Monday morning. Something broke across Damien's expression. Relief. Hope, fear, all of it crashing together in a way that made him look human instead of untouchable. And after that, he asked quietly. Claire stepped closer until no distance remained between them. After that, we figure out what happens when the most dangerous man in Chicago stops pretending he doesn't need anyone. Damien's hands came up to frame her face, gentle, reverent, like he was holding something precious that might shatter if he applied too much pressure. I need you, he whispered, more than I've ever needed anything. Then he kissed her, not soft, not tentative, like a man who had spent 14 months holding back, and finally gave himself permission to stop. Claire kissed him back, with equal desperation, her hands fisted in his shirt, her body pressed against his. 14 months of want and denial and careful restraint burning away, like paper in fire. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, rain still hammered against the windows, and Chicago still glowed below them, and nothing about the world had changed except everything had changed. What happens now? Claire asked. Damien rested his forehead against hers. Now we hope I didn't just make the biggest mistake of both our lives. 3 weeks later, gunfire shattered the illusion that resignation meant safety. Claire's resignation became official on a Tuesday morning that felt like every other Tuesday, except it wasn't. She signed the paperwork in Damien's downtown office, while Lucas Reed watched with an expression that suggested he knew exactly why she was leaving and didn't approve. Heavy silence filled the room, the kind that made even breathing feel intrusive. You're making a mistake, Lucas said after she set down the pen. Claire met his stare without flinching. That's not your call. No, but when this falls apart for both of you, I'm the one who'll have to clean up the mess. Lucas turned toward Damien, who stood near the windows, with his back to both of them. You sure about this? I'm sure. Damien's voice stayed level, final, the tone he used when arguments were pointless. Lucas shook his head slowly. You're thinking with the wrong part of your anatomy. Careful. Damien finally turned around. His expression remained neutral, but something dangerous flickered behind his eyes. You're talking about someone I care about. Exactly my point. Lucas grabbed the signed resignation papers off the desk. You care, which means you're compromised, which means people are going to notice weakness where there wasn't any before. Let them notice. You built an empire on the principle that nothing matters more than control. Now you're abandoning that because you can't keep your feelings in check around your bodyguard. The temperature in the room dropped. Claire stood slowly. Her muscles tensed instinctively, not because she feared violence, but because she recognized the particular brand of silence that preceded it. Damien crossed the space between himself and Lucas in 3 measured steps. Not rushing, not threatening, just closing distance with the kind of calm that made sharp men nervous. Say that again, Damien said quietly. Lucas held his ground, but his jaw tightened. I'm trying to protect you from yourself. I didn't ask for protection. No, you asked me to run your organization while you settle into domestic life with someone who just quit the one job that justified her being in your life around the clock. Lucas's voice rose slightly. You think your enemies won't see this? You think they won't realize the great Damien Calloway finally found something that matters more than business? Then they'll realize I'm human. Being human gets you killed in our world. Damien stared at Lucas for 5 long seconds before speaking again. Are we done here? Lucas looked between Damien and Claire like he was watching a disaster unfold in slow motion. Yeah, we're done. He left without another word. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow felt louder than slamming. Claire exhaled slowly. He's not wrong. He's not right either. Damien moved toward her, close enough that she could see exhaustion in his eyes from too many late nights and not enough sleep. Lucas thinks control means isolation. I used to think the same thing. And now I think isolation just means dying alone. He reached for her hand. His fingers were warm against her palm. I'd rather take the risk. Claire wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that love could exist in a world built on violence and deception and carefully calculated betrayals. But wanting something didn't make it safe. The ambush happened during a routine transfer 3 weeks after Claire's resignation became official. Damien had insisted she stay away from active operations. No more security details. No more putting herself between him and bullets. She had agreed because arguing felt exhausting, and because part of her wanted to believe normal was possible. She was wrong. The call came at 2:17 in the morning. Claire's phone vibrated against the nightstand in Damien's penthouse, where she had fallen asleep reading financial reports that made her eyes cross. She grabbed it without thinking. Lucas's voice came through rough and urgent. We've got a situation. Claire sat up fast. Her heart rate spiked immediately. What kind of situation? Ambush. Downtown transfer route. 3 vehicles. Heavy weapons. Lucas was breathing hard like he had been running. Damien's alive, but we're pinned. Ice flooded Claire's veins. Where? Warehouse district, near the river. A pause. Claire, he's asking for you. She was already moving, feet hitting the floor, grabbing clothes from the chair where she had thrown them earlier. I'm coming. No, stay where you are. This is exactly what they want. I don't care what they want. Claire yanked on jeans with one hand while holding the phone with the other. Send me the location. Claire, send it. Now. Lucas hesitated for maybe 2 seconds before coordinates appeared via text message. Reinforcements are en route. Just be careful. Claire ended the call and finished dressing in under 90 seconds. Black tactical pants, dark shirt, boots laced tight. She grabbed the weapon she kept secured in Damien's safe and checked the magazine by muscle memory before heading toward the elevator. The city looked different at 2:30 in the morning. Emptier, darker. Rain had started falling again, turning streetlights into blurred halos that reflected off wet pavement. Claire drove Damien's backup vehicle, a nondescript sedan that moved fast when pushed, through downtown Chicago, while her mind ran through tactical scenarios she had trained for but hoped never to use. Ambush meant planning. Planning meant someone inside the organization had disclosed information. Disclosure meant trust was compromised at levels that should have been impossible to penetrate. She reached the warehouse district in 14 minutes, pulled over 2 blocks away from the coordinates Lucas had sent, killed the engine and sat in sudden silence while rain hammered against the windshield. This was reckless. This was exactly the kind of emotional decision that got people killed. This was also unavoidable because the alternative was sitting safe in a penthouse while Damien died 2 miles away. Claire checked her weapon one more time. Then she stepped out of the car and moved toward the sound of distant gunfire echoing between empty buildings. The scene resembled something out of a war zone. 3 black SUVs sat at angles across a narrow street between warehouses. Bullet holes punctured metal. Glass littered the pavement. 2 bodies lay motionless near an overturned vehicle. Damien's people had taken defensive positions behind the SUVs. Maybe 8 shooters total. Claire approached from the south side using shadows and abandoned shipping containers for cover. Her training kicked in automatically. Breathing controlled, movements precise, eyes scanning for threats. She spotted Lucas crouched behind a middle vehicle. Blood streaked down the left side of his face, from a cut somewhere above his hairline. He was directing orders to men positioned around him while returning fire toward warehouse windows, where muzzle flashes indicated enemy positions. Claire moved closer until she was within speaking distance. Lucas. He spun toward her voice with his weapon raised, recognized her, lowered the gun. What the hell are you doing here? Where is he? Inside the lead vehicle. Uninjured, but we can't move without drawing more fire. Lucas wiped rain and blood out of his eyes. They've got us boxed in. Claire studied the tactical situation carefully. 3 warehouses formed a rough U-shape around the street. High ground advantage, multiple firing positions, professional setup. How many shooters? At least 10, maybe more. Lucas fired 3 rounds toward a window. Someone screamed. They knew our route, knew our timing, knew exactly where to strike us. Inside job. Has to be. Lucas's jaw tightened, which means we can't trust anyone who isn't standing here right now. Claire's mind moved rapidly through possibilities. Inside information, coordinated ambush, resources that suggested organization rather than opportunistic attack. Viktor Sokolov, she said. Lucas glanced at her sharply. What? The Russian. From the meeting 6 weeks ago. He wanted proof of loyalty. Claire gestured toward the ambush site. This is him sending a message, or testing our defenses. Same thing. Claire moved toward the lead vehicle before Lucas could stop her. She covered the distance in a crouched run. Bullets cracked overhead, but nothing came close. Professional shooters conserving ammunition, waiting for better targets. Claire reached the SUV and yanked open the rear door. Damien sat inside looking completely composed despite the chaos surrounding him. Suit jacket torn at the shoulder, dirt smudged across his cheek, but his eyes were clear and focused. And the moment he saw Claire, everything else disappeared. You shouldn't be here, he said. Too late. Claire climbed into the vehicle and pulled the door shut behind her. Bullets pinged off armored metal. You okay? I'm fine. He reached for her face with both hands. You need to leave. Now. Not happening. Claire. We can argue about this later. She pulled away from his touch and assessed the situation through the window. Right now, we need to get you out of this kill zone. Damien stared at her for a moment that stretched too long. Then something shifted in his expression. Not surrender. Recognition. Understanding that Claire wasn't his bodyguard anymore, but she also wasn't someone who walked away when bullets started flying. What's the plan? He asked. Lucas said reinforcements are coming. How long? 5 minutes, maybe less. Then we hold position and let them close the perimeter. Claire checked her weapon again. Where's your gun? Damien pulled a pistol from somewhere beneath the seat. You really think I sit in ambushes unarmed? Despite everything, Claire almost smiled. Fair point. More gunfire erupted from the north side. Someone screamed, glass shattered. The sound of running footsteps on wet pavement echoed between buildings. Lucas's voice cut through the noise. They're pushing the left flank. Claire glanced at Damien. Stay here. Like hell. He was already opening his door. If we're doing this, we're doing it together. Before Claire could argue, Damien was out of the vehicle and moving toward Lucas's position with his weapon raised. Claire exhaled sharply and followed, because letting him run into gunfire alone felt worse than dying next to him. They reached Lucas 30 seconds before everything went sideways. A massive explosion ripped through the warehouse to the east. Fire bloomed orange and deadly against the night sky. The shock wave hit like a physical force, throwing Claire sideways into Damien's chest. His arms caught her instinctively, while debris rained down around them. What the hell was that? Lucas shouted. No one answered because the second explosion answered for them. West Warehouse. Same force. Flames climbing toward low clouds, while smoke billowed thick and black. They're burning their positions, Damien said. His voice stayed eerily calm, which means they're about to run or they're about to charge. Lucas's phone buzzed. He checked it fast. Reinforcements are 2 minutes out. Too long. Claire scanned the burning buildings. Movement in the shadows. Figures retreating. They're pulling back. She was right. The gunfire stopped as suddenly as it started. Silence rushed in to fill the void except for crackling flames and rain hitting pavement. The attacking force dissolved into darkness like they had never existed. Damien's people held their positions, weapons raised, trigger fingers ready, but no targets remained. Check for wounded, Lucas ordered, his voice hoarse. And get eyes on those warehouses. I want to know who we were fighting. Men moved cautiously through the wreckage. 2 of Damien's people were dead. 3 more injured. The ambush had been brutal and efficient and designed to send a message rather than secure a victory. Claire stayed close to Damien, while chaos organized itself into something resembling order. Her heart rate slowly returned to normal. Her hands stopped trembling. Professional detachment settled back into place like armor she had forgotten she was wearing. Damien looked at her with an expression that said everything words couldn't. Relief, fear, gratitude, anger. All of it mixing into something raw and honest and completely unguarded. Don't ever do that again, he said quietly. Do what? Risk yourself for me. Claire met his stare without flinching. I'm not going to promise that. Then I'm not going to stop worrying every time you leave the penthouse. Good. She reached up and wiped blood from a cut above his eyebrow. Means you care. Damien caught her wrist gently. His fingers were warm despite the cold rain. I care more than I should. No such thing. Sirens wailed in the distance. Police or fire department or both. Someone would have reported the explosions. Questions would need answering. Accounts would need coordinating. Lucas approached them with his phone in hand. We need to move. Now. Before official channels start asking questions we can't answer. Damien nodded once. Then he turned back to Claire with an intensity that made her breath catch. Come with me. It wasn't a request. It was something else. Something desperate beneath the surface of his usual control. Okay, Claire said. They left together while fires burned and rain continued falling, and Chicago's underworld learned that Damien Calloway had finally found something worth guarding more than his empire. The secured safe house sat in a neighborhood that looked ordinary from the outside. Single-family homes, quiet streets, nothing suggesting the building contained armed men and sophisticated security systems designed to detect threats before they became problems. Claire followed Damien through the front door into a space filled with tension thick enough to suffocate. Men lined the hallways, weapons visible, expressions hardened. Everyone looked drained and furious, and ready for violence that might or might not come. Lucas was already inside coordinating response strategies with senior members of Damien's organization. Maps spread across a dining table, phones buzzing constantly, voices low and urgent. Damien walked past all of it without acknowledgement. He headed straight toward a back bedroom. Claire followed because not following felt impossible. He closed the door behind them, and the noise from outside immediately muffled into background noise. For 5 seconds, neither of them moved. Then Damien turned around and looked at Claire like he was seeing her for the first time. Not as bodyguard, not as employee, not even as his girlfriend or whatever inadequate label described what they had become to each other. Just Claire. He crossed the room in 3 steps. His hands came up to frame her face, and his hands were trembling. Damien Calloway, the coldest man in Chicago, the head of an empire built on violence and calculated control. His hands were trembling. I wasn't afraid of dying tonight, he said. His voice came out rough, fractured. Nothing like the man who negotiated with killers without flinching. I was afraid I'd never see you again. The confession hit harder than any bullet ever could. Claire grabbed the front of his torn shirt and pulled him closer. I'm here. You shouldn't be. Damien's forehead pressed against hers. You should be somewhere safe. Somewhere far away from this life. But I'm not. No, you're not. His breath came faster, and that frightens me more than anything Viktor Sokolov could ever do. Claire had seen Damien survive assassination attempts without breaking composure, had watched him face down men who wanted him dead without showing fear, had memorized every version of his control. But this was different. This was complete emotional collapse, wrapped in expensive clothing and blood-stained hands. What are we doing? Claire whispered. Really, I don't know. Damien pulled back, just enough to look at her properly. But I know I can't lose you. Not now. Not ever. You might not have a choice. Then I'll burn the whole city down before I let that happen. The words should have sounded dramatic, exaggerated, like something out of a film. Instead, they sounded like a vow. Damien's forehead pressed against hers. You should be somewhere safe. Somewhere far away from this life. But I'm not. No, you're not. His breath came faster, and that frightens me more than anything Viktor Sokolov could ever do. Claire had seen Damien survive assassination attempts without breaking composure, had watched him face down men who wanted him dead without showing fear, had memorized every version of his control. But this was different. This was complete emotional collapse wrapped in expensive clothing and blood-stained hands. What are we doing? Claire whispered. Really, I don't know. Damien pulled back just enough to look at her properly. But I know I can't lose you. Not now. Not ever. You might not have a choice. Then I'll burn the whole city down before I let that happen. The words should have sounded dramatic, exaggerated, like something out of a film. Instead, they sounded like a vow. Claire kissed him because words felt insufficient, because nothing could contain what she felt watching him come apart in front of her, because 3 weeks ago she had made a choice that terrified her, and tonight proved exactly why that choice mattered. Damien kissed her back with desperate intensity, his hands tangled in her hair, his body pressed against hers like he needed physical proof she was real and present and alive. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the bedroom felt smaller and the walls felt thinner, and reality crashed back in with brutal clarity. We need to figure out who talked, Claire said. Damien nodded slowly. His professional mask started sliding back into place. Victor's the obvious suspect. Too obvious. Claire moved toward the window and looked out at quiet suburban streets that gave no indication of the violence building beneath the surface. If Victor wanted you dead, he would have sent more shooters. Last night felt like reconnaissance, testing our response times, our loyalty. She turned back around. Someone inside your organization fed them information. Route, timing, security protocols. That's not Victor. That's someone you trust. Damien's jaw tightened. Then we start eliminating people from the list until only the guilty remain. That could take weeks. Or hours if we apply the right pressure. Claire knew what he meant, knew the methods Damien used to extract truth from people who lied professionally, knew she should probably object on moral grounds she no longer entirely believed in. But moral objections felt hollow when someone had just tried to kill the man she loved. Lucas, she said. Start with him. Damien's eyes sharpened. You think Lucas betrayed me? I think Lucas objected loudly when I resigned. I think he believes you're compromised, and I think compromised bosses make convenient targets when ambition outweighs loyalty. Claire moved closer. I'm not saying he's guilty. I'm saying he's a possibility. Damien considered this in silence. Rain continued falling outside. Voices murmured beyond the closed door. Time moved forward whether they were ready or not. Finally, he nodded once. We'll speak to Lucas first. They found him in the kitchen pouring coffee that smelled like scorched promises. Lucas looked up when they entered. His expression remained neutral, but his shoulders tensed slightly. You two okay? We need to talk, Damien said. About who knew our route tonight. Lucas set down the coffee pot carefully. You think I leaked information? I think someone did. Damien leaned against the counter with deceptive ease. And you're the one who oversees security logistics, along with 4 other people. Lucas's voice stayed level, but anger simmered underneath. You're seriously going to stand there and suggest I try to get you killed? I'm asking questions. No, you're letting her cloud your judgment. Lucas gestured toward Claire. 3 weeks, she's officially off the detail, and already you're turning paranoid. Careful. Damien's warning was quiet but absolute. Why? Because I'm calling out the obvious. Lucas's control began fracturing. You built an empire on trusting your instincts. Now you're trusting someone who quit rather than actually protect you when it counted. That's not what happened, Claire said, isn't it? Lucas turned his attention toward her fully. Cold, calculating. Nothing like the professional colleague who had worked beside her for 14 months. You spent over a year watching his back. Then the moment things became personal, you walked away. Makes me wonder what else you're walking away from. Enough. Damien's voice cut through the room like steel. You don't speak to her like that. Oh, what? You'll fire me? Kill me? I've given you 8 years. I protected your interests when you were too absorbed in your own ego. And this is how you repay loyalty, by questioning whether I'm the one who betrayed you. Silence filled the kitchen thick enough to drown in. Damien stared at Lucas with an expression Claire couldn't read. Not anger, not disappointment. Something colder and infinitely more calculated. Who else knew the route? Damien asked quietly. Lucas's jaw worked for a moment before answering. Marcus Webb's people requested a downtown meeting. We adjusted the route to accommodate their location. Marcus Webb. Claire repeated the name slowly. The real estate developer from the gala? Yeah. What about him? Claire looked at Damien. The man you threatened for touching me? The man who left that party looking like you dismantled his entire world. Understanding flashed across Damien's face. He arranged this. Not alone. Claire's mind connected the threads rapidly, but maybe with help from someone who had a grievance to settle. Victor, Damien said, or someone operating for Victor. Claire turned back toward Lucas. Did you verify Marcus's people independently? Lucas hesitated just long enough to confirm he hadn't. They fed you false meeting coordinates, Damien said, his control finally breaking. You adjusted our route, and they were waiting. I didn't know. You should have known. Damien's voice rose. That's your entire function. Verifying threats, confirming details, making sure I don't drive straight into an ambush because you stopped paying attention. Lucas's face went pale. I've never been careless a day in my life. Then you became overconfident, which is worse. I got distracted. Lucas's voice matched Damien's volume. I got distracted watching you discard everything we built for someone who might not even be here in 6 months. You want to talk about poor judgment? Look at yourself. You're not the same person you were 3 weeks ago. You're more exposed, more vulnerable, and everyone in this city can see it. The words hung in the air like accusations that couldn't be retracted. Damien stared at Lucas for a long moment. Then he did something Claire had never seen before. He smiled. Not warm, not genuine. The kind of smile that suggested consequences were inevitable and possibly welcome. Get out. Damien said softly. Lucas blinked. What? Get out of this house. Out of my organization. Out of my life. Damien's voice stayed frighteningly calm. You've got 24 hours to vanish before I decide you're a liability worth addressing permanently. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything. Damien took a step forward. You questioned my judgment, you compromised security, and you disrespected someone I care about. Any one of those would be sufficient. All 3 together? You're fortunate I'm giving you 24 hours instead of 24 seconds. Lucas looked between Damien and Claire like he was watching everything he had constructed collapse in real time. This is a mistake. My mistake to make. You'll regret this. Maybe. Damien's expression remained carved from stone. But at least I'll regret it on my own terms. Lucas stood frozen for another few seconds. Then he grabbed his jacket off the back of a chair and walked out of the kitchen without another word. The front door closed moments later. Silence rushed back in. Claire exhaled slowly. Was that necessary? Damien turned toward her. Some of the anger faded from his eyes, but exhaustion replaced it. He was right about one thing. I am different than I was 3 weeks ago. Is that bad? I don't know yet. Damien moved closer and pulled her into his arms. But I know I'd rather be different with you than unchanged without you. Claire pressed her face against his chest and listened to his heartbeat gradually slow toward normal. Outside, rain continued falling. Men continued planning responses to threats that multiplied faster than solutions. And somewhere in Chicago, Marcus Webb and Victor Sokolov were learning that Damien Calloway guarded what mattered more ferociously than he guarded his empire, which meant the war was just beginning. Dawn broke over Chicago with the kind of gray light that made everything look washed out and impermanent. Claire stood at the safe house window watching the city wake up, while her mind refused to stop replaying the previous night in brutal detail. Gunfire, explosions, Damien's hand trembling when he touched her face, Lucas's cutting words before he walked out the door. Behind her, Damien sat at the dining table, surrounded by maps and phones and men whose loyalty was suddenly uncertain. His voice stayed measured while issuing orders, professional, controlled, as if the past 6 hours hadn't happened. But Claire noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened when certain names came up, the fatigue he refused to acknowledge. "We need to move against Webb within 48 hours, one of Damien's senior people was saying. Tall man, scarred knuckles. Before he realizes we know. "Webb's connected to Victor," Damien replied, "which means moving against him means declaring conflict with the Russians." "We're already in a conflict. They just shot at you." "They shot near me. There's a difference." Damien leaned back in his chair. "You think last night was a warning. I think last night was reconnaissance disguised as an assault." Damien's eyes shifted toward Claire briefly before returning to the man across from him. "They wanted to see how we respond, who we trust, where our vulnerabilities are." "And what did they learn?" "That I'm willing to sacrifice everything I built to protect what matters." A pause, which either makes me dangerous or desperate, maybe both. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes. Strategies, contingencies, responses to scenarios that escalated from bad to catastrophic with alarming speed. Claire stopped fully listening around the 15-minute mark. Her attention had snagged on something else entirely. A detail. Small, probably insignificant, except it wasn't. Last night Lucas said Marcus Webb's people had requested a meeting downtown. Past tense. Requested. Like the meeting had already been arranged before the ambush. But Claire remembered the gala. Remembered Marcus leaving with his confidence shattered after Damien threatened to destroy his business empire. Remembered thinking Marcus looked like a man who would carry grudges indefinitely. Why would someone nursing a grievance request a business meeting 3 weeks later? Unless the meeting was never genuine. Unless someone else had planted that information knowing Lucas wouldn't verify it independently. Claire's blood ran cold. She turned away from the window and caught Damien's attention with a look that communicated they needed to talk privately. Now, he excused himself from the table without explanation and followed her into the back bedroom where they'd had their emotional reckoning hours earlier. The moment the door closed, Claire spoke quickly. "Lucas didn't set you up." Damien frowned. "We established that Marcus." "No. Listen." Claire paced the small room. Her mind was moving fast. "Lucas said Webb's people requested the meeting, but why would Webb request anything after you threatened him at the gala?" "Revenge. Maybe. Or maybe someone told Lucas that Webb's people had requested a meeting. Someone Lucas trusted enough not to question." Understanding appeared on Damien's face. "You think someone fed Lucas false information. I think someone inside your organization has been playing both sides." Claire stopped pacing. "And I think they used Lucas as the fall guy because you'd believe he became complacent before you'd believe he actively betrayed you." "Who? I don't know yet. But whoever it is has deep access. Route information, security protocols, meeting schedules." Claire's hands curled into fists, and they're perceptive enough to make Lucas look culpable without getting caught themselves. Damien pulled out his phone and started scrolling through contacts. "I need to bring Lucas back in." "He won't come. Not after you threatened to kill him." "Then I'll go to him." "That's exactly what they want." Claire grabbed his arm. "You leave the safe house. You're exposed. Vulnerable. I'm not letting an innocent man carry the blame for someone else's betrayal. Lucas isn't innocent. He got careless. People died because of that. Claire's voice stayed steady but firm. But you're right that he didn't actively betray you, which means we need to find out who did before they finish what they started last night. Damien stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. How do we find them? We follow the money. 3 hours later, Claire sat in front of Damien's laptop, surrounded by financial records that made her head ache. Banking transactions, wire transfers, offshore accounts, shell companies layered so deep that tracing ownership required forensic accounting skills she didn't fully possess. But patterns existed if you looked carefully enough. Small deposits, always under $10,000 to avoid federal reporting requirements, always from different sources, always landing in accounts connected to people in Damien's organization. Claire cross-referenced names against a list of people who had known about last night's route. 8 names. She eliminated 3 immediately. Wrong timeline, wrong access level, wrong motivation. That left 5 possibilities. The logistics man, Damien's financial coordinator named Rachel, an advisor named Chun, the head of Damien's legitimate business operations named Patricia Crane, and someone Claire didn't recognize from security footage named Joel Martinez. She was studying account numbers when the bedroom door opened. Damien entered carrying coffee that smelled far better than the burned version Lucas had made earlier. Find anything? Maybe. Claire accepted the coffee gratefully. 5 people with access and unusual deposits over the past 6 months. Show me. She pulled up the spreadsheet she'd been constructing. Names, dates, amounts, patterns suggesting someone was receiving regular payments for information they had no right to be sharing. Damien studied the screen carefully. His expression remained neutral, but Claire saw the moment recognition landed. Patricia, he said quietly. Claire looked at the name again. Patricia Crane, head of legitimate operations, trusted enough to have access to everything, perceptive enough to hide her tracks, motivated enough to want more than her current position offered. You know her well? Claire asked. I've known her for 6 years. Damien's jaw tightened. She helped construct the legitimate side of my business when most people thought going legal was a sign of weakness. Which means she knows exactly how your empire is structured and exactly where the vulnerabilities are. Damien set down his coffee untouched. She was at the gala. Saw what happened with Marcus. Probably concluded I was exposed. So she reached out to Victor. Or Victor approached her when he started probing for weaknesses. Damien pulled out his phone. Either way, she's been supplying him with intelligence for months. What are you doing? Summoning her for a meeting. That's an error. Claire stood. If she's sharp enough to hide her betrayal this long, she's sharp enough to run the moment you call her in. Damien lowered his phone. We need proof first. Something she can't deny or explain. The kind that comes from making her think she's already won. The plan was audacious. Claire would approach Patricia privately. Tell her that Damien was unraveling after Lucas's departure. That his judgment was failing. That the organization needed grounded leadership before everything collapsed. The story was close enough to truth that Patricia would believe it, and desperate enough that she might reveal herself. They arranged the meeting at a coffee shop in Lincoln Park. Public location, neutral ground, somewhere Patricia would feel secure enough to speak honestly. Claire arrived 15 minutes early and claimed a corner table with clear sight lines to all exits. She ordered black coffee. She didn't touch and waited. Patricia showed up precisely on time, looking like every accomplished executive who had ever graced a business publication cover. Tailored suit, perfect composure, confident smile that suggested she commanded whatever room she occupied. She settled into the seat across from Claire. This is unexpected. We need to talk, Claire said. About Damien. Patricia's expression stayed pleasantly neutral. What about him? He's losing control. Claire leaned forward slightly. Last night's ambush rattled him more than I've ever seen. And firing Lucas was an error he can't undo. Damien doesn't make errors. Everyone makes errors when they're operating on emotion instead of logic. Claire paused deliberately. He's compromised, and compromised leaders get people killed. Patricia sipped her coffee slowly. Why are you telling me this? Because you've been with him long enough to recognize when things are collapsing. And because I need someone who understands the business side if we're going to stabilize the situation. The organization can't survive if Damien keeps making decisions based on personal feelings. Claire held Patricia's gaze steadily. Someone needs to take initiative. Someone he trusts. Someone positioned to assume control if things deteriorate further. For a moment, Patricia's composure slipped. Just slightly. Just enough to reveal the calculation happening underneath. That sounds like mutiny. Patricia said carefully. That sounds like survival. Claire glanced around the coffee shop, as if checking for threats. Look, I love him. But love doesn't mean ignoring reality. And reality is that Damien Calloway is exposed right now in ways he's never been before. Patricia set down her coffee. What exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing we prepare for the possibility that Damien can no longer lead effectively. That means securing resources, building alternative power structures, making sure the empire endures even if its leader doesn't. That's treason. That's pragmatism. Claire leaned back. But I understand if you're not interested. I'll find someone else who can see the opportunity. She started to stand. Patricia's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. Wait. Claire sat back down. Patricia's expression had shifted. Less guarded. More calculating. How long have you been planning this? Since I realized Damien would choose me over his empire. Claire let just enough bitterness into her voice. Which makes me either the most fortunate woman alive or the most misguided. Haven't decided which yet. Patricia studied her carefully. And you think I'd be willing to betray someone I've worked with for 6 years? I think you're perceptive enough to recognize when a vessel is sinking. Claire held her gaze. And I think you've already made arrangements for precisely this scenario. The silence stretched long enough that Claire wondered if she'd misjudged. Then Patricia smiled. Not warm. Not genuine. The smile of someone who had been executing a long strategy and finally glimpsed the finish line. Viktor Sokolov approached me 8 months ago. Patricia said quietly. He wanted information about Damien's operations. Supply chains, financial structures, vulnerabilities. Claire's pulse surged, but her expression stayed composed. And you provided it. I provided enough to keep him engaged. Patricia's voice dropped lower. Victor's building something that will make Damien's operation look minor, and he promised me a senior position when he assumes control of Chicago. Takes control from Damien. Damien's had his run, but he's exposed now. Distracted. Patricia's eyes gleamed with something cold and ambitious. Victor just required the right moment to act. Last night was supposed to be that moment. Except Damien survived. For now, Patricia leaned forward. But the next strike will complete what we started. Victor's bringing professionals from New York. Real operatives. Not the reconnaissance crew from last night. Claire's blood turned cold. When? 72 hours, maybe less. Patricia's smile widened. And when it's done, Victor will command the city, and I'll oversee the legitimate business operations that keep everything functioning. And Damien will be a memory. Patricia said it without hesitation, without guilt, like discussing quarterly projections rather than murder. Nothing personal, just business. Claire wanted to reach across the table and end the conversation a different way. Instead, she smiled back. Then I want in, Claire said. Patricia assessed her for a long moment. You genuinely betray him? I genuinely survive. Claire kept her voice steady. And if Victor's as formidable as you suggest, being on the winning side is smarter than dying loyal to someone who's already lost. Patricia nodded slowly. Victor wants to meet you. Confirm you're committed. When? Tonight. I'll send you the location. Patricia stood. And Claire, if you're deceiving us, Victor will know. And he's considerably less forgiving than Damien. She left the coffee shop without looking back. Claire sat alone at the corner table while her hands began trembling. She had the confession, the timeline, everything required to prove Patricia was the traitor. But she also had something far worse, Confirmation that a genuine attack was arriving with professional killers in less than 72 hours. And Damien was completely unprepared. Claire drove straight back to the safe house, exceeding the speed limit, and not caring about traffic laws that suddenly felt irrelevant. She found Damien in the back bedroom reviewing security footage from the previous night's ambush. He looked up when she entered, read her expression, stood immediately. What happened? Claire closed the door and relayed everything. Patricia's confession, Victor's strategy, the timeline, the reinforcements arriving from New York. All of it delivered in rapid, clipped sentences, while Damien's expression moved from concern to cold to something darker than anything Claire had ever witnessed. When she finished, silence occupied the room like a presence. 72 hours, Damien finally said. Maybe less. And Patricia has been working with Victor for 8 months. Yes. Damien walked to the window, stared at nothing. His shoulders were rigid. His hands formed fists at his sides. I trusted her, he said quietly. 6 years. I trusted her with everything. I know. She helped construct the legitimate businesses. Made me believe going legal was achievable. His voice stayed unnervingly calm, and the entire time she was selling me to Victor Sokolov. Claire moved closer, but didn't touch him. What do you want to do? Damien turned around. His eyes looked vacant. Not angry, not wounded. Just empty. I want to eliminate her, he said matter-of-factly. I want to eliminate Patricia and Marcus and everyone who concluded I was vulnerable enough to betray. But that won't stop Victor's reinforcements from arriving. Won't prevent the attack. Won't protect the organization from collapsing when professional operatives tear through whatever defenses we managed to assemble in 72 hours. He was right. They were outmanned, out-resourced, out of time. Patricia had spent 8 months feeding Victor intelligence about every vulnerability in Damien's empire, and now Victor was coming to exploit all of it simultaneously. We could disappear, Claire said. Leave. Let Victor have Chicago. Damien looked at her like she'd proposed surrender. I don't retreat. Then we fight, against professional operatives, with 8 months of intelligence on how we operate. Damien shook his head. That's not fighting. That's choosing to die. So what's the alternative? Damien stared at her for a long moment. Then something shifted in his expression. Not acceptance, not defeat. Something harder and infinitely more calculated. We give Victor exactly what he wants, Damien said slowly. Which is me. Claire's stomach dropped. No. She moved between him and the window. Absolutely not. Listen, you're not offering yourself as bait. Why not? That's what he wants. That's what Patricia promised him. Damien's voice stayed measured, logical, terrifying. If I surrender, Victor has no reason to attack. His reinforcements stand down. The organization endures. And you die. Maybe. Definitely. Claire grabbed the front of his shirt. Victor doesn't want you alive. He wants you gone. Offering yourself simply makes his objective easier. Then what do you suggest? I suggest we stop thinking like victims and start thinking like people who survived 14 months of this world before everything became complicated. Damien's hands came up to cover hers. I can't lose you. You won't. Patricia's right. I am compromised. Every decision I make is filtered through whether it keeps you safe. His voice fractured slightly. That's not how empires survive. Empires don't matter if you're dead. Neither does anything else. They looked at each other while the weight of impossible choices pressed down, like atmospheric pressure before a storm. Finally, Claire spoke. We need Lucas. Damien frowned. I fired him. You also threatened to kill him, which means he's probably furious enough to help us destroy the people who actually betrayed you. Claire released his shirt, and he knows your organization better than anyone, including Patricia. He won't return. He will if we tell him the truth. Claire pulled out her phone. Because Lucas wasn't careless. He was manipulated, and the man I worked beside for 14 months won't let that stand. She dialed Lucas's number before Damien could object. It rang 4 times. Then his voice came through, rough and guarded. What? Lucas. It's Claire. Silence. I know you're angry. Claire continued. You have every right to be. But we were wrong. You didn't betray Damien. Patricia did. More silence. Then, prove it. Claire spent 5 minutes laying out everything they'd uncovered. The financial records, Patricia's confession, Victor's strategy. All of it. When she finished, Lucas exhaled slowly. That matches. She's been supplying Victor with intelligence for 8 months. Yes, which means last night was my fault for being foolish enough to trust her. No, last night was her fault for being convincing enough that nobody detected it. Claire glanced at Damien. But the next assault will kill everyone if we don't stop it, and we can't stop it without you. Another long pause. Then Lucas said something that changed everything. I'm not coming back to save Damien. I'm coming back to destroy the people who made me look incompetent. Fair enough. Where do you need me? Claire gave him the safe house address. Lucas arrived 40 minutes later, looking like he hadn't slept. Bruises shadowed his eyes. The cut above his hairline had been cleaned, but not bandaged. His expression stayed carefully neutral when he entered and found Damien waiting in the dining room. You look like hell, Damien said. You look worse. Lucas dropped into a chair without invitation. Now tell me how we're going to neutralize Patricia Crane without starting a conflict we can't survive. And for the first time in 12 hours, Claire thought maybe survival was achievable after all. The plan came together over 4 hours of relentless strategy that required more coffee than sleep and more anger than caution. Lucas spread maps across the dining table while Damien marked locations with red ink. Claire stood at the whiteboard they'd retrieved from a closet, writing names and connections in handwriting that deteriorated as exhaustion increased. Victor's reinforcements are arriving from New York, Lucas said, tapping a map of Chicago's South Side, which means they'll use one of 3 entry points. The airport is too exposed. That leaves the rail yards or the interstate corridor through Gary. Patricia will oversee their arrival, Damien added. His voice had gone cold again. Professional, like the past 12 hours, had stripped away everything except the part of him that survived by being sharper and more determined than his enemies. She's the one with legitimate business connections. The one who can move people through the city without raising alarms. Then we move against her first. Claire turned from the whiteboard. Sever Victor's coordination before his people arrive. Patricia's perceptive. Lucas leaned back. She'll have protection, probably staying somewhere Victor controls. So we determine where. How? Claire pulled out her phone. She thinks I'm aligned with her, which means she'll tell me. She typed a message to Patricia asking for Victor's meeting location and transmitted it before second-guessing herself. The response came back 90 seconds later. Warehouse on Archer Avenue, South Side. Come alone. 10 p.m. Claire showed the message to Damien and Lucas. That's a trap, Lucas said immediately. Obviously. Claire pocketed her phone. But it's also the only way to get Patricia and Victor in the same room. They'll eliminate you the moment you enter. Not if I offer them something they want more. Damien's eyes sharpened. What are you thinking? Claire took a breath. I'm thinking Patricia told Victor I'm prepared to betray you, which means Victor wants to meet the woman who fractured Damien Calloway's judgment, the woman who made him vulnerable. You're not a vulnerability, Damien said. I know that, but Victor doesn't. He sees me as leverage, a weakness he can exploit. Claire moved closer to the table. So we let him believe that. Let him think I'm the key to dismantling you. And when he's concentrated on you, we strike from behind, Lucas said, nodding slowly. Exactly. Damien stared at her with an expression that suggested he was cataloging every way this could go wrong. You walk into that warehouse alone, you may not walk out. I won't be genuinely alone. Claire indicated the map. You'll have snipers positioned here and here. Lucas coordinates the perimeter team. And you? She looked at Damien directly. You stay concealed until Victor exposes himself. I don't hide. You do if we want to catch him off guard. Claire's voice stayed firm. Victor believes you're emotionally compromised, making errors. Let him keep believing that until it's too late to matter. Damien and Lucas exchanged a glance that communicated an entire conversation without words. Finally, Lucas spoke. It could work. It has to work. Claire turned back to the whiteboard. Because in 60 hours, Victor's reinforcements land, and this becomes exponentially more difficult. They spent the next 8 hours preparing for a confrontation that would either preserve Damien's empire or dismantle it entirely. Lucas summoned every person whose loyalty he could verify. Not many. Patricia's betrayal had made trust feel like currency nobody could afford. But 12 men arrived at the safe house, carrying weapons and grievances deep enough to risk their lives. Damien reviewed the warehouse layout using satellite imagery. 3 entrances, high windows, clear sight lines from neighboring structures. Not perfect, but viable if people were positioned correctly. Claire cleaned her weapon for the 3rd time and tried not to think about all the ways entering Victor's trap could end badly. Around midday, Lucas pulled her aside in the kitchen while Damien coordinated sniper positions in the other room. "You don't have to do this," Lucas said quietly. Claire looked up from the coffee she was pretending to consume. "Yes, I do." "No, you genuinely don't. We could identify another approach." "There's no other approach. Not one that doesn't involve more casualties." Claire set down the mug. "Patricia believes I'm on her side. That's our advantage. We lose at the moment we hesitate." Lucas studied her carefully. "He'll never forgive himself if something happens to you." "Then make sure nothing happens to me." "I'm serious, Claire." Lucas gestured at the surrounding chaos. "Damien's different now. Since you quit. Since last night. Since all of this. You matter to him in ways that distort his judgment." "I know. Do you?" "Because the Damien I worked with for 8 years wouldn't have fired me for making an honest mistake. He wouldn't have threatened me. He would have been rational and completely focused on protecting the organization." Lucas's voice dropped. "But you changed that. You made him human. And humans make decisions driven by feeling instead of logic." Claire met his stare, without blinking. "You think I should walk away? I think you're the only real leverage Victor has. Remove yourself from the situation and Damien returns to being the most dangerous man in Chicago instead of someone whose weakness is visible." "I'm not leaving him. Even if staying gets him killed." Before she could answer, Damien appeared in the doorway. His eyes moved between them with awareness that suggested he'd caught at least part of the exchange. "Problem?" Damien asked. "No," Lucas said quickly. "Just finalizing strategy." Damien didn't believe him, but let it pass. "We're ready. Snipers move into position at 8. Perimeter team at 9. Claire goes in at 10. "And you?" Claire asked. "I'll be close." Damien's jaw tightened. "Closer than Victor expects." Night descended over Chicago like a curtain dropping on the final act of something irreversible. Claire dressed in black tactical clothing, secured her weapon where it wouldn't show beneath a jacket, checked her backup magazines twice, and her earpiece 3 times. Damien watched her prepare with an intensity that made the air feel heavy. "You can still withdraw," he said. "So can you." "I'm serious." "So am I." She turned to face him fully. "We're past withdrawing. Have been since the moment Patricia confessed." "She confessed because you let her think you'd betray me." "I know. Which means Victor will test you. Push you to prove your commitment to him instead of me." Damien moved closer. Close enough that Claire could see exhaustion and fear contending behind his carefully managed expression. "And I need you to know that whatever you have to say in that warehouse, I'll understand." "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the possibility that Victor forces you to choose." Damien's hands came up to frame her face. "And if staying alive means denouncing me, I need you to do it." "Damien, I'm serious, Claire. If it's a choice between your life and my ego, choose your life. Every time. Without hesitation." Claire grabbed his wrists. "I'm not going to betray you." "You may have to. Then I'd rather die first." "Don't say that." His voice fractured. "Why not?" "Because you're the only reason I want to survive this." The admission came out raw, unfiltered. Nothing like the controlled man who negotiated with killers for a living. "Without you, the Empire doesn't mean anything. The power doesn't mean anything. None of it matters if you're not here." Claire pulled his hands away from her face and held them between both of hers. Then trust that I'm capable enough to walk into that warehouse and walk back out alive. Trust that Lucas positioned our people correctly. Trust that we're sharper than Victor and Patricia combined. I do trust that. But I also know that trust doesn't stop bullets. He paused, breathed, attempted again. If something goes wrong, I need you to know that meeting you was the finest mistake I ever made. Claire kissed him before the moment could fracture under the weight of everything neither of them could control. She kissed him like time was limitless rather than counting down to a confrontation that might end everything. When they finally separated, Lucas was standing in the doorway looking uncomfortable. "It's time," he said. The warehouse on Archer Avenue matched every other abandoned industrial structure on Chicago's south side. Fractured windows, corroded metal, weeds growing through cracked concrete. The kind of location where people disappeared and nobody investigated. Claire parked 2 blocks away and covered the remaining distance on foot, while her earpiece relayed periodic updates from Lucas's perimeter team. Sniper 1 in position. Sniper 2 in position. Perimeter secured. Claire's pulse stayed measured. Training overrode where fear wanted to intrude. She reached the warehouse's main entrance, where a single door stood propped open with a cinder block. No guards visible. No obvious security, which meant the security was either professional enough to remain hidden, or this was precisely the trap Lucas had anticipated. Probably both. Claire stepped through the door into darkness that smelled like rust and aged oil. Her vision adjusted slowly. Shapes emerged from shadows. Equipment. Crates. Empty pallets stacked against walls. At the far end, light spilled from an elevated office, with windows overlooking the floor below. Movement inside. Silhouettes behind glass. Patricia's voice drifted through the empty space. "She's here." Claire moved forward steadily. Her hand stayed loose near her weapon. Not threatening. Ready. She climbed metal stairs that rang beneath her boots. At the top, she pushed open the office door. Patricia stood near a desk looking identical to her appearance at the coffee shop. Composed, polished, assured. But this time, 3 armed men flanked her wearing expressions, suggesting they earned their pay through violence. And seated behind the desk with a glass of whiskey, like he owned the entire city, was Victor Sokolov. Claire Whitmore. Victor's accent was dense. His smile was colder. The woman who broke Damian Calloway. Claire let the door close behind her. "I didn't break him. I just made him care about something beyond power. Same outcome in our world." "Perhaps." Victor gestured to an empty chair. "Sit, please." Claire remained standing. "I'm comfortable here." "As you prefer." Victor sipped his whiskey. "Patricia tells me you wish to join our organization, that you understand Damian's moment has passed. I recognize that survival means choosing the prevailing side. And you believe I will prevail. I believe Damian is exposed, driven by emotion, making choices based on feeling instead of strategy." Claire kept her voice level. "Which means yes, you'll prevail." Victor studied her like she was a puzzle requiring additional assembly. "You were his bodyguard for 14 months. You protected him, stood beside him, and now you stand here offering to betray him. I stood beside him when he was worth protecting. That changed. When he dismissed his most loyal associate for a mistake that wasn't even Lucas's fault. When he started issuing threats he couldn't execute. When he stopped being the coldest man in Chicago and started being someone who could be manipulated through emotion. Through you. Through me." Claire met Victor's gaze directly. "Which makes me either his greatest vulnerability or your greatest asset. Depends on how you use me." Silence occupied the office. Patricia watched with an expression, suggesting she found this deeply satisfying. The armed men remained motionless. Victor swirled his whiskey. "You know what I think." Victor finally said, "What? I think you're lying." Claire's pulse elevated, but her face stayed composed. "Why would I lie?" "Because Damian Calloway doesn't fall in love with women who betray him easily. He falls in love with women who are loyal beyond all logic." Victor set down his glass. "And genuine loyalty doesn't dissolve in 3 weeks." "You're mistaken." "Am I?" Victor stood and moved closer, then demonstrated. He pulled out a phone, dialed a number, activated the speaker. The line rang twice before Damien's voice came through. Who is this? Victor Sokolov. I believe you're searching for someone. Silence. Then, where is she? Standing right here. Unharmed. Victor's eyes never left Claire's face. And she has something to tell you. He held out the phone toward Claire. This was the test. The moment Patricia had been engineering since their coffee shop meeting. The choice that would prove whether Claire was genuinely willing to betray Damien or simply playing a hand she couldn't win. Claire took the phone. Damien's breathing was audible through the speaker. Controlled but rapid. Claire, his voice carried weight that couldn't conceal itself. I'm all right, she said. Are you alone? No. Victor's here. Patricia. 3 guards. I'm coming. Don't. Claire cut him off. Stay where you are. Claire. I mean it, Damien. Don't come. Silence extended long enough that Victor's smile grew wider. Then Claire said the words she'd been constructing since the moment she walked through the warehouse door. I'm done protecting someone who can't defend himself. I'm done watching you make errors, because you care more about me than your empire. And I'm done pretending we have a future when this life doesn't permit love. Damien's breathing stopped entirely. So you're going to hear this once, and only once. Claire's voice stayed controlled even though her hands were trembling. Walk away. Surrender Chicago to Victor. Vanish before his reinforcements arrive, and complete what last night started. Because I won't be there to protect you anymore. Claire, I'm remaining with Victor. He's offering me more than you ever could. Safety, power, a future that doesn't involve watching the man I love get killed because he's too emotionally compromised to recognize his enemies approaching. She could sense Damien fracturing through the phone, could detect the precise moment her words struck, like rounds he couldn't deflect. You don't mean that, he finally said. I do. Claire. Goodbye, Damien. She ended the call and returned the phone to Victor. Patricia was smiling like she'd just claimed something irreplaceable. The guards appeared less tense, and Victor studied Claire with an expression suggesting he was reconsidering everything. That was persuasive, Victor said. It was truthful. Was it? He moved closer, close enough that Claire could detect expensive cologne and observe the scars on his hands. Because if you're deceiving me, you just acquired a very permanent adversary. I'm not deceiving you. Then you won't object to one final proof. Before Claire could ask what he meant, Victor nodded at one of his men. The guard moved to a metal cabinet against the wall, retrieved a laptop, set it on the desk, and opened it to reveal security footage of the warehouse perimeter, where Lucas's team was positioned precisely where they assumed nobody could observe them. Claire's blood became ice. You see, Victor said calmly, I've been in this profession longer than Damien has been alive, and I recognize when someone is constructing a trap. He gestured at the screen displaying multiple angles of men crouched behind cover with weapons ready. Your people have been in position for 40 minutes, which means this. He gestured between himself and Claire. Was never about you joining me. It was about drawing me into one location long enough for Damien to attack. Patricia's smile vanished. You said she was genuine. I said she was convincing. Victor turned back to Claire. But convincing doesn't mean honest. Claire's mind raced through options that were rapidly disappearing. The advantage of surprise was gone. Victor knew about the perimeter team, which likely meant countermeasures were already deployed. So here's what unfolds now, Victor continued. His voice stayed conversational, almost cordial. You're going to contact Damien. Tell him to withdraw his people. And then you're going to witness what happens to men who believe emotion signifies strength instead of weakness. And if I decline? Victor nodded at a different guard. The man produced his own phone, tapped the screen, held it up so Claire could see. Live footage. Damien crouched behind a dumpster approximately 30 yards from the warehouse entrance, completely unaware he was being observed. I have 8 snipers surrounding this building, Victor said, all with clear shots at Damien Calloway, all waiting for my signal. Claire's hands formed fists. You'll ignite a war. No. I'll conclude one. Victor drew his own weapon from a shoulder holster, not threatening, simply demonstrating he was prepared. So, you can contact him, tell him to withdraw, preserve his life, and spend the remainder of yours knowing you chose survival over love. Or you can refuse, and I'll eliminate him while you observe. Your decision. The office went silent except for Claire's heartbeat in her ears. This was the scenario Damien had anticipated. The choice between his life and her loyalty. The moment where everything reduced to impossible decisions with permanent consequences. Through the window, she could see the warehouse floor below, empty except for shadows. Her earpiece was still active, which meant Lucas was hearing all of this, which meant he knew the perimeter was compromised and Damien was in a sniper's sights. Claire made a decision. "All right," she said. Victor raised an eyebrow. "All right, what?" "All right, I'll contact him." Claire held out her hand for a phone. "But you pull your snipers first. I'm not giving you everything while receiving nothing. You're not positioned to negotiate." "Neither are you." She held his gaze. "Eliminate Damien and his entire organization descends on you with everything available. You might prevail eventually, but you'll lose people, resources, time." Claire kept her voice steady. "Or you can let him withdraw. Conserve your strength for taking the city without a conflict that costs more than it's worth." Victor considered this. Patricia looked furious. "You said we'd finish him tonight." "I said we'd neutralize the threat." Victor's gaze never left Claire. "But perhaps there's more than one way to accomplish that." He pulled out his phone, made a call, spoke in Russian too quickly for Claire to follow, then nodded. "My snipers are standing down. Contact Damien." Claire took the phone Victor offered, dialed Damien's number. It rang once before he answered. "Claire, get out." She spoke immediately. "No time for explanations. The perimeter is compromised. Victor knows everything. You have approximately 2 minutes before this deteriorates." "I'm not leaving without you." "Yes, you are." She glanced at the window. "Lucas." She knew he was monitoring. "Pull everyone now." Full withdrawal. Through the window, she detected movement. Men emerging from concealed positions, retreating, dissolving into darkness. And somewhere in that movement, Damien was making the same choice she'd forced on him. Survival over pride. Life over empire. Her above everything else. "I'm coming back for you." Damien's voice through the phone was raw, fractured. "I swear to you, Claire. I'm coming back." "I know." She ended the call before he could say anything else that would make this harder. Victor retrieved the phone, checked his own surveillance feeds, observed Damien's people withdrawing into the night. "Perceptive," Victor said, "but temporary." Claire said nothing. Patricia moved closer to Victor. "What now?" "Now we wait for my reinforcements to arrive. Then we complete what we began." Victor gestured at his guards. "Take her downstairs. Ensure she's comfortable. She'll be our guest until Damien learns that love is the most costly vulnerability a man can carry." 2 guards seized Claire's arms. She didn't resist, didn't fight, because resistance would get her killed, and the dead couldn't escape. They moved her down the metal stairs, across the warehouse floor, into a small room that had once served as an office, but was now simply a concrete space, with a single chair and a door that locked from outside. The guard pushed her inside, closed the door. The lock engaged. Claire sat in darkness and listened to her own breathing while her mind worked through scenarios that all ended badly. Damien was alive. Lucas had withdrawn the team. Victor didn't have his immediate victory, but she was captive. And in 60 hours, Victor's reinforcements would arrive, and this would repeat. Except next time Damien would be coming for her knowing it was a trap. And love made people do reckless things. Claire closed her eyes and tried not to consider all the ways this could end. Claire sat in darkness for 3 hours before the door opened again. Not Victor, not Patricia. One of the guards, carrying a bottle of water and a protein bar that appeared to have been stored somewhere for months. He set both on the floor without speaking and departed. The lock re-engaged. Claire didn't touch either item. She remained in the chair with her hands relaxed in her lap, and her mind working through calculations that refused to produce satisfactory results. Damien knew her location. Lucas understood the layout. They'd withdrawn, but that didn't signify retreat. It meant regrouping. The question wasn't whether Damien would come for her. The question was how long before Victor recognized that too, and relocated her somewhere impossible to trace. She tested the door handle. Solid. Checked the walls for weaknesses. Concrete. No windows. No ventilation beyond a single grate, too small for escape. Professional containment. The kind designed to hold people who knew how to break free. Claire returned to the chair and waited. For hours later, the warehouse erupted into chaos. Gunfire shattered the silence. Shouting in Russian and English. Running footsteps on concrete. Breaking glass and heavy impact sounds. Claire stood immediately. Pressed her ear against the door. More gunfire. Closer. Someone screaming. Then silence that felt more ominous than noise. The lock disengaged. The door opened. Lucas stood in the entrance, holding a weapon that had clearly been recently discharged. Blood marked his face from the cut above his eye. His expression was grim. "We need to move," he said. "Now." Claire didn't ask questions. She followed him out into the warehouse, where chaos had transformed familiar space into something unrecognizable. Bodies on the floor. 2 of Victor's guards. 1 of Damien's people she recognized from the safe house. Lucas moved quickly. Claire stayed close. Her eyes scanned for threats even without a weapon in hand. They reached the main entrance, where more of Damien's people had secured a perimeter. Maybe 8 men total. Fewer than before. Meaning casualties she couldn't process yet. "Where's Damien?" Claire asked. Lucas gestured toward the office. "Upstairs." "With Victor." Claire's pulse surged. "Alone?" "Not exactly." Lucas produced a weapon from beneath his jacket and handed it to her. "But close enough that you should get up there." Claire checked the magazine by reflex. Then she ran toward the metal stairs, without waiting. She took them 2 at a time. At the top, the office door stood open. Light spilled out. Voices carried. Claire moved to the entrance and stopped. Damien stood in the center of the room, holding Victor at gunpoint. Blood dripped from Damien's left arm. His suit was torn. His face was marked, but his hand stayed perfectly steady. Victor sat in the chair behind his desk. No weapon visible. No guards remaining. Just a man who had miscalculated and was now confronting consequences he couldn't negotiate away. Patricia lay near the filing cabinet, unconscious or worse. Claire couldn't determine which from the doorway. "Claire." Damien's eyes flicked toward her briefly before returning to Victor. "You okay?" "I'm fine." She stepped into the office with her weapon raised. "What happened?" "We came back." Damien's voice was flat, the tone he employed when violence had become unavoidable. Victor believed we'd wait for his reinforcements. He was wrong. Killing me initiates a war you cannot win. Victor's expression stayed carefully composed despite the weapon aimed at him. "I don't require a win. I only require you gone." Damien's finger moved toward the trigger. "For believing you could take her. For concluding I was too compromised to respond." "Damien." Claire moved closer. "Don't." "Why not?" "Because ending him makes you the same as him. And you're not." She positioned herself where he could see her without taking his attention from Victor. "You're better. You've always been better. That's why people follow you instead of men like him." "He attempted to destroy everything I constructed. He failed. He used you against me. I'm standing here, alive, because you came back, because Lucas coordinated the assault, because your people are loyal enough to risk everything even when reason suggests they should run." Damien's jaw tightened. "He doesn't merit mercy." "I'm not requesting mercy. I'm requesting that you be perceptive." Claire stepped closer. "Eliminate him, and his organization arrives tomorrow. Let him survive, and you transmit a message worth more than his death." "What message?" "That you're formidable enough to spare adversaries who underestimate you." Silence occupied the office while Damien considered this. Victor watched them both with an expression suggesting he was recalculating everything he believed about Damien Calloway. "I should eliminate you anyway," Damien finally said to Victor, "simply for making her believe she had to betray me to preserve my life." "I didn't betray you," Claire said quietly. Damien's eyes moved to her. "You told me to withdraw, to surrender Chicago. I told him what he needed to hear to prevent his snipers from shooting you." Claire held his gaze. "But I never meant it. Not for one instant." Something fractured across Damien's expression. Relief, pain, gratitude, all colliding simultaneously. He lowered his weapon. Not entirely, just enough to communicate that he wasn't going to act in the next 5 seconds. Leave Chicago, Damien said to Victor. Take whatever remains of your organization and vanish, because if I see you again, mercy won't factor into the discussion. Victor stood slowly. His hand stayed visible and unthreatening. And my reinforcements? We'll redirect them to a city that will have them. You have 12 hours. Damien gestured toward the door. After that, anyone connected to you becomes a target. Victor moved toward the exit, paused near Claire. You're more courageous than I credited. And you're not as perceptive as you believed. Claire's voice stayed cold. Now walk away before Damien reconsiders. Victor departed without another word. His footsteps echoed down the stairs, across the warehouse floor. Then silence rushed back in. Claire lowered her weapon. Damien did the same. They stood in an office that carried the scent of blood and smoke and difficult choices, while Chicago persisted 40 feet below. Patricia, Claire asked. Unconscious. Damien moved toward Claire slowly, like approaching something that might vanish if he moved too quickly. Lucas was more forceful than necessary. She'll recover in federal custody. Enough evidence to hold her for decades. And Marcus Webb, already in custody. The FBI has been building a case against him for 2 years. We provided the final evidence they needed. Claire nodded. The adrenaline was fading. Exhaustion arrived like a physical weight. And Lucas? What about him? You dismissed him. Threatened him. I was wrong. Damien stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could observe every mark left by a confrontation that had nearly cost them everything. About many things, but primarily about believing I could maintain this life without allowing anyone close enough to matter. And now I know differently. His hands came up to frame her face, gentle despite the violence still present in the warehouse below. You preserved my life tonight, not by shielding me from bullets, by reminding me what I was fighting for when reason said I should retreat. Claire leaned into his touch. I meant what I said on the phone. Which part? The part about no longer protecting you. I know, because I can't be your bodyguard and you're... She paused. Whatever we are. So what do? We figure out how to be partners rather than protector and protected. Claire's hands covered his. We construct something that doesn't require me to stand between you and danger, and we stop pretending that loving each other creates weakness. Damien's eyes searched her face. What if I don't know how to do that? Then we learn together. He kissed her. Not desperate like before, not urgent. Just steady and certain and real. When they finally separated, Lucas appeared in the doorway looking drained. Police are approaching. We need to clear out. Damien nodded once. Then he turned back to Claire. Come with me. Where? Somewhere that isn't a crime scene. Claire almost smiled. All right. They departed together, while emergency lights painted the night in red and blue. Police secured the perimeter. Paramedics addressed injuries. Reporters would arrive eventually with questions nobody intended to answer accurately. Lucas coordinated the resolution with efficiency, suggesting he'd managed such situations before. Ensuring accounts aligned, evidence disappeared. Witnesses recalled the version of events that kept everyone out of federal custody. Damien and Claire slipped away before official statements became mandatory. They climbed into a vehicle Lucas had positioned 2 blocks away and drove through Chicago while dawn began breaking over the skyline. Neither spoke for the first 10 minutes. Just breathed, existed, let the weight of surviving gradually settle into something manageable. Finally, Claire broke the silence. Where are we going? Somewhere quiet. Damien kept his eyes on the road. Somewhere distant from warehouses and ambushes and people who believe power means never showing vulnerability. That's not an answer. No, it's not. He glanced at her briefly. Because I don't have an answer yet. I only know I can't continue living the way I was before you. Before me, you governed Chicago. Before you, I endured Chicago. There's a distinction. Damien's hands tightened on the steering wheel. And I'm tired of merely enduring. They drove north through neighborhoods that shifted from industrial to residential to something approaching suburban. The city gave way to smaller communities. Eventually, Damien pulled into a lot overlooking Lake Michigan, where water extended toward a horizon without apparent end. He killed the engine. They sat in sudden quiet, broken only by waves meeting rocks below. "I need to tell you something," Damien said. Claire turned toward him. "When Victor's guard showed me that footage of you in the office, when I heard you tell me to walk away." He stopped, breathed, tried again. "I realized that loving you was the most terrifying thing I had ever done. More terrifying than constructing an empire. More terrifying than confronting enemies who wanted me eliminated. Because for the first time in my life, I had something to lose that genuinely mattered." "I know the feeling." "Not completely." Damien turned to face her. "Because you've always been courageous enough to care about people even when it placed you at risk. But I spent 34 years believing that caring was weakness, that emotion was liability, that the only means of survival was ensuring nothing mattered more than control." "What changed?" "You did." His voice fractured slightly. "You walked into my office 14 months ago and gradually, without my awareness, you became the thing that mattered more than survival, more than power, more than anything I had ever built." Claire reached for his hand. "That frightens you." "It terrifies me, because I don't know how to protect what matters, when what matters is a person rather than an institution." "Then stop trying to protect me and start trusting that I can protect myself." Damien looked at their joined hands. "I dismissed Lucas because he made a mistake that nearly cost me my life. But the genuine reason was because he was right. I am compromised. I do make decisions based on keeping you safe rather than what's optimal for the organization." "Then dismiss me too." He looked up sharply. "Dismiss me from the role where I'm your responsibility, where my safety is your burden." Claire tightened her grip. "Because as long as you see me as something requiring protection, we'll never be equals. And I didn't quit being your bodyguard simply to become your liability." "You're not a liability." "Then demonstrate it. Let me stand beside you rather than behind you. Let me make my own decisions, even when they carry risk. Let me be your partner instead of your vulnerability." Damien was silent for a long moment. The sun continued its ascent. The lake persisted in its existence. "I don't know if I'm capable of that," he finally admitted. "Then we'll determine it together. One day at a time, one choice at a time." Claire moved closer. "Because I'm not leaving. Not after everything we survived to reach this moment. Even though being with me means living in a world where last night occurs. Even though." She touched his face, where a bruise was deepening. "Because the alternative is existing without you. And that feels worse than any ambush Victor could arrange." Damien drew her into his arms. They sat in a vehicle overlooking Lake Michigan, while the world gradually awakened and continued as if nothing had changed. Except everything had changed. 3 months later, Claire opened her own security consulting firm in a downtown office that appeared legitimate because it was. Corporate clients, executive protection, risk assessment. Nothing involving criminal enterprises or warehouses where people were shot. Damien attended the opening reception wearing a suit that likely cost more than her first month's rent. He conversed with potential clients, offered polished introductions, performed as a successful businessman, supporting his partner's new venture rather than the crime lord he had been 3 months earlier. Lucas was there as well, reinstated as Damien's second-in-command after a conversation Claire hadn't witnessed, but suspected involved apologies neither man wanted to offer. "This is unusual," Lucas said quietly. He stood near the refreshments holding champagne. He wasn't drinking, observing where Damien was laughing at something a corporate security director had said. Seeing him like this. Like what? Present. Relaxed. Like someone who sleeps at night instead of planning how to survive until morning. He's still planning. Just different things. Because of you. Because of both of us. Claire accepted a champagne flute from a passing server. He chose to change. I simply made it easier. Lucas studied her carefully. People are discussing how Damien Calloway stepped back from half his empire to go legitimate. How the coldest man in Chicago suddenly cares about building something legal instead of powerful. Let them discuss. They're saying you changed him. They're correct. Claire sipped her champagne. But he changed me too. Made me understand that surviving doesn't require remaining detached, that caring about people is strength rather than weakness. And you're satisfied with that? Surrendering the intensity? Claire looked around the office she had constructed, the legitimate enterprise, the clients who didn't carry weapons, the life that appeared normal from the outside. I'm satisfied with choosing survival over death, she said, and peace over perpetually preparing for conflict. Lucas nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I think you're beneficial for him, even if it required me time to recognize it. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, because if this deteriorates, I'll be the one saying I warned you. Claire almost smiled. Fair enough. The reception continued for another 2 hours. Connections made. Foundation laid for something that might genuinely endure beyond the next crisis. When the last guest departed, Claire found Damien alone in her new office, gazing at Chicago's skyline through the window. You okay? She asked. I was reflecting on the first time we met. How you entered my office looking like you could handle anyone who challenged you. I still can. I know. He turned from the window. But now you do it protecting corporate executives rather than crime lords. Is that a problem? No. It's different. A better different. Damien moved closer. I'm proud of you. For building this. For demonstrating that leaving my world doesn't mean losing yourself. I didn't abandon your world. I expanded mine. Claire leaned against her desk. And you're expanding yours. Going legitimate. Building enterprises that don't require violence to sustain. Most of them. Damien, I'm being honest. He drew her closer. Mostly. Claire wrapped her arms around him. We're going to be fine. You understand that, correct? I'm beginning to believe it. Good. Because I didn't survive Patricia and Victor and your possessiveness, just to watch you collapse under doubt. Damien laughed quietly. The sound was genuine, warm. Nothing like the cold composure he had maintained for most of his adult life. My possessiveness? You threatened to dismantle Marcus Webb's entire business empire because he touched my arm. He touched you inappropriately. He made conversation. There's a distinction. Not to me. Damien's hand settled on her waist. I'm still working on the part where other men exist near you, and I don't immediately consider drastic measures. Keep working on it. I will. Promise. He pressed his lips to her forehead, but I'm not promising to appreciate it. 6 months after the warehouse, Damien proposed during a quiet evening at home, rather than somewhere elaborate and theatrical. No ring prepared, no grand design, simply the two of them eating takeout on his penthouse balcony while Chicago glowed below. Marry me, he said without warning. Claire nearly choked on her noodles. What? Marry me. Make it official. Stop allowing people to introduce you as my partner when you're considerably more than that. That's possibly the least ceremonial proposal in history. I can manage ceremonial if you prefer. Whatever gesture seems appropriate. Damien set down his food. But I'd rather be honest. I want to marry you because every day without you feels incomplete. Because you make me want to be better than I was. Because loving you is the only thing I've ever done that feels more significant than surviving. Claire looked at him while processing the reality that Damien Calloway, the man who had spent 14 months maintaining careful distance, was proposing over takeout. You're serious, she said. Completely. We've only been officially together for 8 months. I've known you for 22 months. I've loved you for at least 18 of them, even when I was too afraid to acknowledge it. Damien reached across the small table. You don't have to answer now. Consider it. Take whatever time you require, but know that whether you respond today, or a year from now, or never, I'm not going anywhere. You're permanently part of my life. Claire looked at their joined hands, thought about everything they had survived to reach this moment. The jealousy, the ambush, the betrayals, the warehouse where she believed she might die without telling him how much he mattered. She thought about 14 months of professional distance that had felt like constraint, about the moment he confronted Marcus Webb, about his trembling hands when he realized she was alive after the warehouse. She thought about choosing survival over death, peace over conflict, love over control. Yes, she said. Damien blinked. Yes, yes, I'll marry you. Not because it's logical or because we've known each other long enough, but because I'm exhausted from pretending the most frightening thing I ever did wasn't falling in love with someone who built an empire on never showing vulnerability. Relief crashed across his expression. He stood, drew her up with him, kissed her like she had just given him something far more valuable than power or wealth or authority over an entire city. When they finally separated, Claire was laughing. "What?" Damien asked. "I just realized I'm going to marry a crime lord who went legitimate because he got jealous." Former crime lord. Still counts. Probably. He held her closer. "But I'd rather be a former crime lord married to you than the most powerful man in Chicago without you. That's almost romantic." "I'm working on it." 1 year later, they were married in a modest ceremony that involved more security than guests. Lucas stood as Damien's best man, looking uncomfortable in a tuxedo. Claire's former military colleagues attended wearing expressions suggesting they still couldn't believe she had fallen for someone from this world. The ceremony was brief. The vows were honest. And when Damien kissed his wife for the first time, he looked like someone who had finally understood that strength derived from letting people close rather than holding them at distance. The reception took place at Damien's penthouse. No elaborate venue, no hundreds of guests, simply the people who mattered celebrating something that had nearly been destroyed before it began. Late in the evening, Claire found herself alone on the balcony where Damien had proposed a year earlier. The city extended below in patterns of light that looked almost beautiful when you weren't running from gunfire. Damien joined her moments later, tie loosened, jacket left inside. He looked settled in ways that still surprised her. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm married to a man who once frightened everyone in Chicago. So yes, I'm extraordinary. Once. Still occasionally. But now you accomplish it through legitimate business pressure rather than actual violence. Progress." Damien leaned against the railing beside her. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not abandoning me when abandoning me was the rational choice. For entering that warehouse knowing it was a trap. For reminding me that power matters less than humanity." Claire turned toward him. "You would have arrived there eventually." "Perhaps, but it would have taken longer, cost more, damaged more people." He reached for her hand. "You made me better. And I recognize that sounds like something printed in a card, but it's genuine. You made me better. You made me better too. Made me believe that caring about people doesn't make you vulnerable. That love is worth risking everything for even when logic argues otherwise." They stood together while the city persisted below them, while their guests celebrated inside, while time moved them toward whatever came next. "What do you think comes now?" Claire asked. "Now we live." Damien drew her into his arms. "We build businesses, make choices, discover how to be married when neither of us has any model for what ordinary looks like." Sounds terrifying. Sounds perfect. Claire laughed against his chest. "You've changed. So have you." "Yes, I have." They remained on the balcony until someone called them back inside for cake or champagne or one of the small rituals that marked moments as significant. And when they finally returned to the gathering, Claire recognized something that felt important. For 14 months, she had shielded Damien Calloway from external threats, from bullets and betrayals and adversaries who wanted him gone. But the genuine protection had emerged from something more fundamental, from choosing each other every day even when it was difficult, from trusting that love was strength rather than liability, from believing that survival meant more than simply remaining alive. It meant constructing something worth living for. Chicago gleamed below them, the city that had nearly ended them, the city they had learned to navigate together, the city that would always form part of their story even as they wrote new chapters elsewhere. Damien had been right about one thing. Falling in love had been the most terrifying decision either of them had ever made. But it had also been the only decision that mattered when everything else fractured. Years later, when people asked Claire Calloway how she had met her husband, she never disclosed the complete truth, never mentioned the criminal empire or the warehouses or the night jealousy saved both their lives. She simply smiled and offered something vague about a security assignment in proximity, and gradually recognizing that the most dangerous man she had ever encountered was also the only one who made her feel genuinely safe. And that was sufficient, because some stories were too intricate for strangers to comprehend, too unfiltered, too genuine. But for the people who lived them, those stories were everything. End.